If you're a Beatles fanatic like me, then you probably sat entranced through every single second of the Get Back miniseries. It is a marvel, a revealing, tragedy-esque glimpse into the personal dynamics of a group on the precipice of collapse, and their ability to produce incredible music. Despite that fact, Peter Jackson, being a huge Beatles fan himself, understood that we didn't want some 2-hour, narrative-driven, feel-good or feel-bad tale. We wanted all of it. I'll watch them run through Don't Let Me Down 40 times. I would watch Ringo stare into space for 20 minutes straight. The documentary dispelled so many myths. They probably were better behaved on camera than they were off camera, which my video covering the hellacious White Album sessions would demonstrate. But they weren't acting either. It's real. We see firsthand the frustrations George Harrison dealt with, and more than anything, we see John and Paul as they were. The myth was this: John found Yoko, and he lost interest in the band. Paul resented John for this, and resented Yoko likewise. So then John resented Paul for not accepting Yoko. They begrudgingly worked alongside each other, despite this. Yet, when you watch the footage, this could not be any less true. The tensions are there, sure, the frustrations, as well as the sadness. But between John and Paul, there exists this otherworldly chemistry, this unspoken language. And when they play music together, it is as if they are in their own world. The Get Back miniseries, despite being plenty somber, still paints a surprisingly positive picture. But I'm afraid to say that behind the curtain, things were much worse than they seemed. Peter Jackson showed us a lot, but there was so much more we weren't shown. There are misleading edits, splices, and despite Jackson wanting to provide us with the most accurate depiction of the band he could, there were stories he was not allowed to tell.
Excuse me, I feel a bit sick.
This video is not just a deep dive into the Get Back miniseries, but part 6 of a series devoted to one question. Why did the Beatles break up? While you can begin here, I highly suggest you begin with part 1, which will provide an enormous amount of context and help you to begin to understand how these incredible friends, musicians, and cultural icons fell apart so contentiously. Here's something you may not realize. There were only about 2.5 months between the completion of the White Album and the first day of filming for what would become Let It Be, directed by Michael Lindsay Hogg. But Beatles months are kind of like dog years. What happens in 2.5 months for them is probably more than what happens to most of us in 12. When mixing for the White Album was finished on October 16th, the Beatles and their team probably heaved a huge sigh of relief. The recording of the album was a shit show, a disaster, and on the business end, Apple Corp continued to bleed money. It was time to band the album together, release it, and hopefully make a whole bunch of money to make up for how much they were losing. Well, the very next day, John and Yoko were arrested for drug possession. At the time, John and Yoko were staying at Ringo's apartment at 34 Montague Square. The apartment itself already had quite the reputation. Not long before, Jimi Hendrix had occupied the space, and before him, Paul had used it as a gathering space, or more accurately, a drug pad, for the many artists that resided in London. The 8-strong police task force, led by Sergeant Norman Pilcher, entered the premises at 11:30 a.m., where they would supposedly find hash inside of an old film canister.
In the late 60s, there was a headhunting cop who was not very high up in the drug department in London, which was pretty new anyway. They had 2 dogs for the whole department. And he went round and bust every pop star he could get his hands on, and he got famous. And some of the pop stars had dope in the house, and some of them didn't. It didn't matter to him. He planted it or did whatever. Later on, that's what he did to me. To cut a long story short, I'd just moved into an apartment, and I'd had everything moved from my other apartment. It was all over the place. So I thought, well, maybe this is a bit of hash that was left over, and I'd forgotten all about it. Possibly that was what happened, you know. And I just copped a plea, you know. He said, I won't get you for obstruction if you cop a plea.
it is not out of the question that Pilcher planted drugs on the scene. But if you trust the word of Peter Brown and Neil Aspinall, John and Yoko were high on heroin when the police arrived and flushed the rest down the toilet. And that film can the marijuana was found in hadn't been touched in years. It's possible it was simply overlooked when the house was initially scrubbed of its stash. And while John and Yoko went to drug court, Paul and Linda Eastman flew to New York. For as much attention is drawn toward the speed and intensity in which John and Yoko's infatuation came on, Paul and Linda's relationship evolved at a similar rate. A couple run-ins here and there, a car ride in New York, and then a sailing trip in Los Angeles, which seemed to cement the fact that they were destined to be together. He would then invite her to London, and over the next month, they would finally spend some substantial time in each other's company. So came the next logical step. It was time for Paul to meet the family. It was his idea. He said he wanted to meet Heather and to know how I lived and where I lived. We figured it could be a disaster if he were recognized. And how could we make sure it would not get uncomfortable? So we did the disguise thing. He loved fooling people into thinking he was not him, that he was an ordinary bloke. Thus comes the inception of Bearded Paul, just as we will see him throughout the Let It Be sessions. It was a simple trip. They went thrift shopping, went to bars, rode the subway. On the rare occasion that Paul was recognized, it wasn't all that huge a deal. New York had a different mentality towards celebrity than other US cities, or even London. And on this trip, Paul, who for so long confessed his difficulties with attachment, with commitment, would impulsively ask Linda to marry him. Linda said no, this first time at least. She could tell the proposal was irrational, born out of a mess of emotions. But in no way did she move to end or slow the relationship. She introduced Paul to her daughter, her parents, and brother. Her father, Lee Eastman, was a show business lawyer, and his son, John Eastman, worked alongside him. Paul was impressed by Lee Eastman's knowledge of music publishing rights. It was here Paul had a revelation. He began to view the Eastmans as the solution for the management of both the Beatles and their company, and he proposed this idea to the rest of the band. We'll see how that goes. Paul and Linda would return to England. He took her to the Cavern, then up to his farm in Scotland. And it was also during this time that John and Yoko made an announcement. Yoko was pregnant. The amount of vitriol directed toward the pair would reach new heights. Much of it was rooted in conservatism of an older era. Having a child out of wedlock was bad enough on its own, not even considering the fact that they were both still technically married to their former partners. And of course, much of it was based in the judgment that had already plagued their relationship. Tragically though, on November 21st, Yoko would miscarry. John and Yoko lost their child. It was this period that both have cited as when their heroin abuse increased significantly. The White Album was released in the UK the very next day. Some critics were puzzled, but as a whole, the album was critically acclaimed and sold incredibly well. With Apple Corps falling apart all around them, one thing became very clear. The Beatles needed money to dig themselves out of the hole, and the only way they were making it was through their music. They had to produce more, and do so quickly. 1968 drew to a close with an Apple Christmas party, somehow attended by members of the Hells Angels San Francisco chapter, who George Harrison may or may not have invited. In what sounds like the basis for a comedy skit, the bikers grew angry to the point of threatening violence due to having to wait so long to be fed. As recalled by Richard DeLillo, Frisco Pete, the head of the San Francisco chapter, turned to John and Yoko, screaming, "What the fuck is going on in this place? We want to eat. What's all this shit about having to wait until 7? Suffice to say, the food was quickly brought out. And so, just like that, we enter 1969, and on January 2nd, filming would begin at Twickenham Studios. But first, how did the whole ordeal come about? Whose idea was it? Surprise, surprise, the concept was all Paul. Though concept may be too strong of a word, as demonstrated clearly in this first episode, no one seems to have a clue what exactly they're making in the first place. All they know is that they want to return to their quote-unquote roots and write and rehearse music that could be performed live. Now the question is, who thought it was a good idea to point a camera at the Beatles during this period? Was there a hope that with the eye of the camera on them, that they'd be better behaved? Michael Lindsay Hogg is admittedly a pest, but you can't help but feel a little bit sorry for him. The Beatles give him no clear directive. They all want, or are open to, different things. He's been handed a responsibility, an opportunity, and he wants to make something out of it. Paul clearly tries to accommodate Hogg to some extent, but the other Beatles really could not care less. From day one, the recording environment in Twickenham studios was abysmal, the atmosphere dreary and cold. The boys all roll in early, which in and of itself is strange and out of character. If you follow the Beatles recording sessions from 1966 on, you'll notice one thing. The boys were late risers. They seemed far more comfortable arriving at the studio at 5, 6 p.m., sometimes much later, and staying far into the night, and on occasion, till the sun broke in the morning. What you see here is the equivalent of waking up, sick from a hangover, looking in the mirror, and desperately saying, "I have got to get my act together." So here we have their attempt. Paul is trying to keep things moving. George, fresh off collaborating with Bob Dylan, seems to have some ounce of optimism, but that is quickly snuffed out. John and Yoko are both clearly high on heroin, and seem to be 1,000 miles away. By far the most interesting part of these first few days are the personal dynamics. Whenever John comes alive, so does Paul. It's clear that they feed off of each other. Despite everything, you can tell that they still love the Beatles, or more specifically, the connection that the band brings the two of them. George, meanwhile, is influenced by anyone but the Beatles themselves. In 1968, George had experienced a significant amount of growth. He had become close friends and collaborated with a number of incredibly gifted individuals. Eric Clapton, Bob Dylan, the band. And all of these acts gave George the one thing he craved most of all: respect. And despite George coming into his own as a songwriter, he clearly remains insecure in the company of the other Beatles.
Not really, just Eric, because he's very good at that. Like improvising and keeping it going, which I'm not good at.
Here's something that you aren't shown or told about in Get Back. Beyond the Beatles, George wasn't doing all that well, especially at home. Let's take a moment to hear from his wife, Patty. In India, George had become fascinated by the god Krishna, who was always surrounded by young maidens, and came back wanting to be some kind of Krishna figure, a spiritual being with lots of concubines. And no woman was out of bounds. I was friendly with a French girl who was going out with Eric Clapton. She was always flirtatious with George, but so were a lot of girls, and he, of course, loved it. Then she and Eric broke up. Eric told her to leave, and she came to stay with us at Kinfon's. It was January 1st, and George and I had seen in the new year at Cilla Black's house. We arrived home in good spirits, but then everything went swiftly downhill. The French girl didn't seem remotely upset about Eric and was uncomfortably close to George. Something was going on between them, and I questioned George. He told me my imagination was running away with me. I was paranoid. Soon I couldn't stand it, so I went to London to stay with Belinda and Jean-Claude. 6 days later, George phoned me to say that the girl had gone, and I went home. I was shocked that George could do such a thing to me. I felt unloved and miserable. So it is with this in the background that George arrives at Twickenham. What is nice to see, though, is that George has no difficulty voicing his opinions on the music the band is producing. After Paul spends a significant chunk of time attempting to bastardize Don't Let Me Down into some doo-wop abomination, George simply says,
I think it's awful, actually.
Well, we're going to improve on
If we had a
that,
tape recorder now and just taped down and played it back, you'd throw that out straight
Yeah,
away.
right. But
No, really.
What then follows is a discussion about the very act of rehearsal itself, of learning and developing the songs as a band, demonstrating clearly that for the past couple of years, the Beatles have severely neglected the practice of simply composing and playing as a group. Something John would express in his 1971 Rolling Stone interview, though not very rationally.
The Beatles' music died then as musicians. That's why we never improved, as musicians. We killed ourselves then to make it. And that was the end of it. And George and I are more inclined to say that, We always missed the club days because that's when we were playing music. And then later on we became technically efficient recording artists.
This eventually devolves into the famous exchange between Paul and George, prompted on by Paul bringing up a prior disagreement. that being George's guitar playing on Hey Jude.
Like, should we play guitar all through Hey Jude? Well, I don't think we should.
Yeah, okay,
you know.
well, I don't mind. I'll play, whatever you want me to play. Or I won't play at all if you don't want me to play. Whatever it is that will please you, I'll do it.
I have to say, I love the way they anxiously strum their instruments between these exchanges.
I'm trying to do it, I can only do me, that one way. However I do, Yeah.
These heavier discussions continue.
Ever since Mr. Epstein passed away, it's never been the same.
I mean, we've been very negative since Mr. Epstein passed away. And that's why all of us in turn has been sick of the group. It's discipline we lack.
We then come to George saying,
Maybe we should have a divorce.
Well, I said that at the last meeting.
this is where the real good stuff is at. It's a direct acknowledgement that the Beatles themselves knew that as a band, they were treading water, that they all had separate avenues they wanted to explore, that they no longer wanted to be confined to the monolith that was the Beatles. But at the end of the day, this has little to no bearing on why the Beatles actually broke up. There was no mutual, amicable conversation saying, hey, we've had a good run, let's just all step away for a bit and go from there. As we will come to find out, it was quite the opposite. We now come to January 8th. We'll begin by analyzing another telling exchange between the band. George presenting to the others a song he wrote just last night, I Me Mine. There are quite a few liberties taken with the editing of this exchange in the docu-series. In the series, George plays the song and appears to get a tepid response. He then plays it to John as well, who throws at him the...
Well, I'll get on the barrel organ.
I don't care if you don't want it. I don't give a fuck. It's going to be musical.
In reality, these words from George were spoken before he even played the song for the first time to Paul and the others.
I Me Mine, it's called. Should I sing it to you? I don't care if you don't want it on your show. I don't give a fuck. It's going to be musical.
It still displays a bit of his insecurity, but is far less contentious than what is shown. The band once again encounters some tension during a rehearsal of Get Back. We see demonstrated perfectly the manner in which Paul went about arranging his songs.
I try and get away from... Get back!
Get away from that.
No,
that's what it is. Isn't it?
But
I wouldn't necessarily say Paul is being bossy here, more so that he wants something very specific, yet isn't exactly sure what it is. He wants to find an alternative for the current arrangement in the chorus, which he finds passé, but George puts simply as...
It's just a chord, like.
I know, but
just
but chords
and
like
some chords
fashions
fit,
and stuff.
fit things.
But it's like drainies.
And he once again brings up Eric Clapton.
Need Eric Clapton.
No, you don't. You need like a...
You need George Harrison.
You need George Harrison. Yeah, but just doing simple things until it's your go. See, but don't... If you vamp, then it takes away from his vamping. But, you can either do that soft or good, You don't... It's that thing,
It does seem that George is keen to emulate the guitarist that he admires the most, of course being Eric, whose style is incredibly freeform. His lead guitar work is one of, if not the most integral piece, in many of his songs. But in the context of Get Back, and in the context of the Beatles, I think Paul is in the right here, though one cannot blame George for his frustration. A frustration that is not just fleeting, but accumulated over a number of years. A frustration that when combined with his own troubles at home, would finally boil over. It was on this day that George would quit the Beatles. In the docu-series, this is presented as occurring right as the boys call for lunch, with George seemingly standing up and delivering the news.
Can we go for lunch?
I think I'll be leaving the band now.
When?
Now.
In reality, these words from George were spoken during or after the lunch itself, as he went to retrieve his coat from the rehearsal space. Just what happened during that lunch? Well, this is where it gets interesting, because there are very conflicting recollections surrounding this incident. When the news was leaked to the press, there were rumors that there was a legitimate dust-up in the dining room, with George and John, quote, coming to blows. The Beatles disputed this. Ringo Starr called the story of a punch-up a load of old rubbish. I was there when it was supposed to have taken place. It's quite untrue. Mal Evans would corroborate this. There wasn't a fight, physical or verbal. There weren't any tempers or shouting. But George Martin would later say, They actually came to blows. You'd think it would have been Paul, but it was John. It was all hushed up afterwards. Now, Glyn Johns, working as producer for the sessions, would recall, when it became apparent that there was going to be a bit of an argument, those of us who weren't in the band left the room. It was clear that it would be intrusive for us to remain. So what actually was said and what went on, I don't know. The whole thing was very uncomfortable, and it was very embarrassing for me and the others who were not in the band to be close by while this was going on. So this implies that even if there wasn't a physical confrontation, that there was at the very least an argument that escalated, contradicting Mal Evans' recollection that George simply stalked off. But the bigger question is this: why? In the recordings we do have, there isn't some clear-cut answer. In the docu-series, it is certainly edited to show George as an outsider, as we are treated to a number of shots of John and Paul playing together, looking at each other, while George sits on the periphery, forgotten. George Martin, Neil Aspinall, and Michael Lindsay Hogg discussed this point in a broader manner not long afterward.
It's them versus John and Paul when it comes to what they want to do and what they want to play.
Yeah.
And if you try doing that for a few months, you're going to end up pissed off.
Yeah.
With the songwriting. They are our songwriting team and he's their team.
Then there were his issues with Yoko. Paul is usually given far more attention when it comes to this subject matter, just due to his relationship with John. But we can't forget that George was also very close to John, and he didn't like the effect Yoko had on their friendship. In reality, George was far more vocal with his displeasure than Paul was.
And George was insulted her right to her face in Apple office at the beginning, just being straightforward. You know, that game of, well, I'm going to be up front because this is what I've heard, and Dylan and a few people said you've got a lousy name in New York, and you give off bad vibes. That's what George said to her, and we both sat through it, and I didn't hit him, I don't know why.
What followed all of this was a full-blown musical thrashing, a release, an elongated experimental jam featuring Yoko with her signature wails and screams. It wasn't the time for any deep discussions, not yet. It is now Saturday, January 11th. John and Yoko would meet with George on this day. With his diary simply reading, "John and Yoko came and diverted me at breakfast." What this means, what they discussed, we can only speculate. All we know is that it made no difference at this point. On Sunday the 12th, the Beatles would meet at Ringo's home. In the docu-series, all we are told is that the meeting did not go well. Not a whole lot to glean from that, but thanks to the extensive taping done at Twickenham, we can pick up the bits and pieces of what transpired at the meeting. One aspect that is not touched upon at all was that this gathering was not even a George Harrison rescue mission, but a business meeting. Present were John Eastman, Linda Eastman's brother, as well as a team of the Beatles' accountants. It is possible that the following document, bestowing the Eastman and Eastman law firm rights to negotiate contracts on the Beatles' behalf, was signed on this day. But once the businessmen left, the meeting seemed to go quickly downhill. Based on the conversation that happened at Twickenham the following morning, what happened was this. Paul, Ringo, and John all made personal pleas to George, attempting to bridge the divide. There was a problem, however. John himself wasn't actually speaking. Yoko was, so George then expressed that he would prefer to speak to the other three Beatles alone. When John acted confused, not understanding why George would say that, twice George said, "I don't believe you." Yoko didn't leave, so George did. It's telling that the following morning, rather than discussing George, the others spend the bulk of their time discussing John and Yoko.
John didn't talk, you see, Yoko talked for John.
Did George stay?
In the middle of all that, actually, George went. They're trying to, like, be as near together as they can. They want to stay together, those two. So it's all right, let the young lovers stay together. But it's not that bad, you know. We got a lot out of Beatles. So that I think John's saying now, obviously it came to a push between Yoko and the Beatles. It's Yoko, you know. She's great. She really is all right. They just want to be near each other, you know. So I just think it's just silly of me or anyone to try and say to him, no, you can't, you know. It's like that. We're striking because work conditions aren't right, you know. But it shouldn't be. Can't operate under these conditions, boy. You know, we're coming out. It's like they're going overboard. about it. But John always does, you know. You can't go saying, be sensible about it and don't bring it to meetings. You know, it's his decision.
What becomes abundantly clear here is that John is the primary driver of this conflict. Yoko is simply existing and playing her role in the relationship they have. It is John, as a Beatle, who has overstepped the bounds, insisting Yoko accompany him to business meetings, to the studio. But it's not like the others, or Paul at least, are particularly surprised that John is behaving this way. Throughout the conversation, Paul repeatedly justifies John and Yoko's behavior and insists that at the end of the day, it's not that big of a deal. But clearly, it is.
But it's going to be such an incredible sort of comical thing, like in 50 years' time, you know. They broke up because Yoko sat on an M. Oh, just something I did. What?
They repeatedly try to reach John, with no luck.
Mouse trying to yes, we've permanently engaged. Permanently engaged?
We come to the famous line, again edited to maximum effect.
And then there were two.
In reality, the exchange went like this.
And then there were two.
Tom and Jerry.
Simon Garfunkel.
No, I said it because you told me.
What?
What?
Simon and Garfunkel used to be Tom
Oh,
and Jerry.
I know. Hey, schoolboy.
It used to be Tom and Jerry. I think it's so cute.
The degree to which this chunk of dialogue was recut is pretty egregious, but this time, I can defend the decision. It's very normal to follow up a somber statement with a humorous one as a means of lightening the mood. Ringo's joke does in no way undermine the pain Paul is feeling, which is demonstrated clearly by the expression on his face. In effect, I think that Peter Jackson, with some creative liberty, captured the mood of the moment more accurately than the audio recording alone. But yes, it is certainly dramatized. Mal then comes to Paul.
Fun to speak to John. Yeah.
And when Paul returns with the news that John's coming in,
He's coming in.
there's a distinct shift in mood, especially in Paul. We now come to the iconic lunchtime discussion, recorded by a mic planted inside the flower pot. From the beginning, the recording is framed misleadingly. The docuseries stating, John and Paul go into the cafeteria for a private conversation. More private than being filmed, I suppose. But they were far from alone, as at the very least, Ringo, Yoko, Linda, and Mal were all there. Regardless, it is probably the most revealing conversation that we have ever been privy to, and we are going to get deep into it. Far deeper than the docuseries itself.
So where's George? But it's not that easy, it's because it's a pestering wound. So we've allowed to, and yesterday we allowed it to go even deeper, but we didn't give him any condition. And it's only because George, when he comes up, when he is that part of it, we have egos and we can't help it. Allow, you know, what you do.
The topic of conversation then pivots from George to John and Paul.
It's just that, you know, it's only this year that you suddenly realise like who I am or who he is or anything like that. But the thing is, you realise there's some, like you were saying about George and some other parts. But up till then, you'd had your thing had carried you so well. I know I'd adjusted before you, alright, that doesn't make me hypocrite, but I know that I'd adjusted to you before that for selfish reasons and for other reasons, not knowing what else to do, and all the other reasons that I adjusted to your ego and allowed you to, you know, if you wanted to get me that out of the way, whatever it is, but this year, you've suddenly seen what you've been doing and what everybody's been doing, and not only felt guilty about it, the way we all feel guilty about our relationship to each other, because we could do more. And the thing is that I'm not putting any blame on you, and suddenly realise that because that was my game, you know, it might have been masochistic, but the goal was still the same, self-preservation. And I have this thing. But I think I felt bad feelings to you, because you've suddenly got it all, you see. I know that because of the way I am, like when we're at men, it's like, do you like me, or whatever it is. I've always played that one. So,
Yeah, sure. I've been watching the picture. But this year, suddenly, it's all happened here. And you take the plane suddenly, as if, you said, oh yeah, you know I'm going inside, as if I'd never done it. And then you thought, I know what it's like. I know we used to kick people. I know how we connived with Len Ivan. I know, you know, and then, but the way I want it, I've done all that. So you've taken the 5 years, because you're different from me, you've taken the 5 years trouble this year. So half of me says, I'll do anything to save you, to help you, and the other half says, but fucking right, I've been through fucking shit because of the 5 years, and he's only just realised what he was doing to him.
I find this segment especially tantalizing, as they repeatedly refer to the distant past, such as John's childhood home, Mindips. And really, what John seems to be getting at here is that he and Paul are both, quote, mean guys, connivers, manipulators. They then again pivot to talking about George, and the dynamics of the Beatles as a whole, and how, because of the degradation of their working relationships, they find themselves unsatisfied with the work they are producing.
George said yesterday, the Beatles to me isn't for us. I think that I alone a Beatle. I think you could. I'm not sure whether my good music is different. Well, alright, I'm just telling you what I think. I don't think the Beatles revolve around the 4 people. It might be a fucking job. It's like you joining instead of Pete. It's like, to me, it is like that. Of course I believe that the Beatles like that. You've always been Fox. I've been to the second Fox. George has been the third Fox. Never. Yeah, but he has. Just listen. You're the rabbit, right? But not always. Listen. Always. But I do think the supreme of it all is that he's right. And I do think that like the soul approach is exactly what he was saying, and that our great sort of cunning is all nothing. I do think that is this is our first way out. I can't really even say that, but I do think when you get right down to it, because the moments of clarity about this being just so innocent, so simple.
You were saying about
Give you enough satisfaction anymore because of the compromise we have to make to be together. The end result of the records now aren't enough because now we know it so clearly how we arrived at it and what it was. Before it was always a surprise. We weren't so aware of how we reacted to each other. But when something came out like Revolver or Pressure or whatever, there was still an element of surprise that we didn't know where it came from. But now we know exactly where it fucking came from and how it arrived at that particular noise and how it could have been much better or it needn't have been at all. But the only way to get it satisfactory for yourself is to do it on your own, and then that's too hard.
what you were saying yesterday. I mean, it was like you write good songs in it. I can't think of any better way. You want studio music. You want to play it. I mean, at least that's what I look at. Yeah, you make good music together, whether you like it or not. And making good music is also, it's really hard working in a relationship. Of course, that's what you said yesterday. That's what I was saying. So, and you also said you want to.
It's like all of us are dissatisfied with the Beatles album. Now, it's not because of the way we got on doing it. Because the end result is as good as it could have been. And I don't know what the reason is.
he's drinking white, isn't he?
You know, but the whole thing is less satisfactory. But you name any of them. His numbers, George's numbers, they're more satisfactory than any numbers they've done before. And I think mine are much better than I've done before. But as a whole thing, it's not satisfactory to me. I dig them individually far more than Simon. As a whole, as a Beatles thing, I don't dig it. It doesn't work with me. I think it's the best music. You know, but as an entity, the whole all was not.
Then Paul talks about how they are, quote, half singing, basically inhibiting themselves as a result of working within the confines of their relationships, of the band, and that they all need to really sing to prove themselves as individuals.
But the great thing is that you singing like you really sing will be it. It will be.
Yes, but there will be ways to do it on your own.
Until then, yeah, sure, until then you'll sing, until you reach how you really sing, you'll sing, you'll half sing. Yeah. And it's probably when we're all very old, we'll all sing together. Yeah. And we'll all really sing, we'll all just show each other, and we'll probably die then, you know, I don't know. Probably, you know, it'll probably be something soft like that, you know. Now I know if when I'm saying it to you all, this is how this song goes. You know, then I know if I half tell you how it goes, that maybe two of you will like it. You know. What I'd like to do is the four of us, you know, we've all got that thing. Different degrees. I think if you one way, we go one way, George one way, and me another. But I know it'll apply to all of us. If one day you can all be singing like you sing, you can be drumming like you drum. George can be really playing. I mean.
Now Paul vents his frustration with John's timidity, or perhaps lack of transparency with his actions. He wants John to really go for it, to be upfront.
I just, because I'm not really sure how I feel about it. Because any time...
You're not sure because you're not sure whether to go left or right on an issue. You've noticed the two ways open to you. You know the way you are. You know the way you are, which is positive. You want to go, now okay, so your positive thing might actually be to kick that telephone box in. It might occasionally be to do that. So you know that's the way you've got to go. But you don't actually want to look like you're kicking the telephone. So you have to sort of say to everyone, look at that over there, everyone. And while they're looking, you kick the telephone box in and sort of...
I think that's a fair representation.
You know, that's me. You know, I do that too. And I think we all do that. But I think the answer is that while you've got us all looking at nothing over there, and you've thrown us for a minute, we would actually all have dug to see you kick that telephone box in. Because we want to see you do it. We actually want to watch the Steve McQueen film where he kicks the telephone box in. And we all want to see that. And I really think that
must be our own fault that we built it up that I can't kick the telephone box, apart from it being my fault.
And this then evolves into a discussion about how Paul's controlling nature creates an environment of fear and tension, especially for John. What becomes clear here is just how significantly the lines of communication in the band have broken down, that despite knowing each other so well, working alongside each other for so long, they've built up walls, become afraid of each other.
Like he plays, not as if he keeps trying to make it play. But I keep trying to make it play like I play. Guitar.
But you don't see the point that we both, mainly...
back on it.
Yeah, okay, is that you try and make George play competently because you're afraid that how he'll play won't be like you want him to play. And that's what we do, and that's what you do to me. So I got to a bit where I thought, it's no good me telling them how to do it. You know, all I tried to do on that album was just sing it to me like I was drunk, you know. Yeah. Just did my best to say, now look, it stands up on its own. Yeah. If I'm not doing it quite well this time.
John brings up how, because of his fear, he relies on George to speak up when Paul is taking one of his songs where he doesn't want it to go.
You know, I've always done the numbers like that. Now, the only regret, just the past numbers, is when, because I've been so frightened, I've allowed you to take it somewhere where I didn't want. Yeah. And then my only chance was to let George. take over or interest George in it, because I knew he. She said, well, he'd take it as is, you know. That it was. I even don't let me down the first time I sang it, because I hadn't allowed myself to say it was a whole song. Yeah. I couldn't. It was only after we'd done it that I realised it was done. You know, and on the Beatles album, I just sort of said, look, here it is, ignore here, this is me singing it drunk. I'll pretend it is if I'm not. What would you do with it? You know, George, you play whatever you like. Yeah. You know, and that's what it was. It wasn't the arrogance of this is it, baby.
He uses two examples here. First off, She Said, She Said. It was during the recording of this song that for the first time, a Beatle, Paul, walked out of a session. There aren't a lot of details about this incident, but this conversation seems to imply there was a disagreement in arrangement, with John and George teaming up against Paul. Then John brings up Don't Let Me Down, which we got to witness firsthand.
Well, we're going to improve
if we had a tape recorder now and just taped that and played it back, you'd throw that out straight away.
Right. But
finally, we are given more information as to potentially why George quit the band that day.
And that's what I was trying to do. Like last week, I said it was going all right for me. I was really trying to say to George, take it there, you know, whereas I wouldn't have got previously. I would have said, take it there with diddle-a-diddle-a-diddle-a-diddle. But I was trying last week to say, no, take it there. Anything you like.
See, the point is
whatever you...
We both did that to George this time. Because of the build-up to it. Now he
treat him a bit like a Mongol.
You can't even, you know, if I now say, all right, take it, he'll say, well, look, I can't take it, I get it. I have to.
See, because he knows what we're all about. Yeah. So he knows that when we say take it, we expect I said that. You expect
just that bit, the bit
yeah.
There's no way we could have translated it to say, you know, and then it came over and said, I'll do it at home. Yeah, well, I mean, that's what he's going to do now.
But it's so,
you know, he's going to go home, so am I, you know.
Yeah.
I'm going to go home to record in the studio, rather than have to go to with anybody in it to record.
But it's only that we've never said that to George. I've never said to George, look, George, I think when I want a guitar bit, I want it exactly like I want it. And he's going to say to me then, you can't have it. You know, see, but that's it. Why? George never says that to me, and I never say that to him. Ringo, I will get problems. But really, I mean, it is going to be much better if we can actually just sit together and say, look, George, I've got a feeling, I want to do it exactly like I play. And he'll say, I'm not you, and I can't do it exactly like you do.
It sounds like Paul and John teamed up on him due to him not playing the way they wanted on I've Got a Feeling, and this time, it was too much for George. We could spend an entire video discussing and analyzing this recording, but I'll let you digest it on your own. Let's keep moving forward. Following this conversation, the three Beatles return to Twickenham studios and once more begin rehearsing. When just 10 minutes in, Paul says,
he was going to see George.
But George, quite literally, has gone back home.
He's gone to Liverpool.
Has he?
Well, only one thing to do until then.
Should we rehearse the numbers?
Yeah.
We come to the 14th. John is once again late and nowhere to be seen. Getting a little extra sleep, are we, John? Well, extra sleep and something else, too. When John and Yoko arrived a couple hours later, they were interviewed by CBC TV in what has been deemed the Two Junkies interview. You're about to see why. John, whose words usually move at a mile a minute, speaks as though he is underwater, his eyes slowly and sedately blinking.
And what she's done is sort of told me somehow that if you take it through to an end, you get a buzz from it, just like having a record released. And that's what I've been doing.
16 minutes into the interview, John retches, says he feels sick, and the camera is shut off.
They are on all those levels, you know. Excuse me, I feel a bit sick. You know, they work on all levels.
You can make it. John, since you...
The interview would continue afterward. When Peter Sellers comes in to visit, he is visibly uncomfortable with John's condition.
Wake up, Lennon.
Wake up, Lennon. It's about time.
Well, not so much, you fellas. Well, guys.
And Paul shortly after says,
I was sort of stoned and high and watching films, and I wouldn't have made it anyway.
Is there any need to do this in public, Mr. Lennon?
John then references his interview with CBC.
You missed me this morning. I did it for CBS. Just leapt off in the middle of the interview. Actually, I'm just recovering from the day, you know.
From the night.
And Paul cannot contain his embarrassment. What is evident to me in this sequence is that Paul is clearly worried for John, not just as a partner in the band, but as his friend. Following this, another meeting with George would take place at Ringo's home. And unfortunately, we have next to no information on what transpired or who was there. All we know is that it was a 5-hour meeting, and that afterward, George rejoined the band. There were some stipulations, however, which pretty much amounted to, we can work on music and be filmed doing it, but I'm sick of Twickenham and I don't want to be forced to do any bullshit I don't want to do. Which honestly, good call, George. Twickenham was a disaster. The space was uninviting, the sound dreadful. Besides, they had a state-of-the-art studio. Hell, more than that, a futuristic, cutting-edge studio. Designed specifically for them by Magic Alex, waiting for them in the basement of Apple headquarters. So much for that. The studio Alex had put together was quite literally unusable. The Beatles and their team basically had to borrow a whole studio's worth of equipment from EMI. Nothing Alex had put together was of any worth. Sound engineer Dave Harries would say, the mixing console was made of bits of wood. It looked like the control panel of a B-52 bomber. They actually tried a session on this desk. They did a take, but when they played back the tape, it was all hum and hiss. The Beatles walked out. That was the end of it. And just what would Magic Alex himself have to say about all this? Well, ladies and gentlemen, listen to this. He claimed that while he was in Greece, someone from Apple or EMI broke into his Apple Electronics workshop and transported his work in progress to the Savile Row basement, aka the studio itself. He says that it was never intended as a working studio, but merely a demonstration of how a multi-track studio might operate. So basically, he's saying that his prototype studio was moved in its entirety and then installed inside of the Apple studio space by an outside party in order to make him look bad. How did this guy stick around the Beatles for so long? The Beatles rehearsed for the first time at Apple Studios on Monday the 20th, but it wasn't until the next day that they would begin both recording and filming. During his car ride over to the studio on Tuesday, Ringo was interviewed by BBC Seen and Heard.
Last week was quite a controversial week for the Beatles. How close are you? We've had reports that you're not as close as you used to be and that the Beatles aren't as rich as everyone's thought they were and that they might have to close down Apple.
Yes, well,
How true is this, Ringo?
Well, should we take them one at a time?
Yes.
All right, what was the first one?
Are you as close?
Yes, you know, there's that famous old saying, you always hurt the one you love. And we all love each other, and we all know that, but we still sort of hurt each other occasionally, you know, where we just misunderstand each other. And we go off, you know, and it builds up to something bigger than it ever was. And then we have to come down to it and get it over with, you know, and sort it out. And so we're still really very close people.
Do you see the Beatles going on like they are at the moment for a long time in the future, or do you see a split very soon?
It depends what you mean as a split. I mean, we split...
Go your separate ways and not
completely, no,
together.
we'll never go... Oh, I can't say never, but I mean, we won't go our separate ways after this album. And we'll always be tied up with each other in some way. You know, because we've signed a lot of papers. It says we stay together for 20 years or something.
It is fascinating hearing the Beatles speak, digest, and interact with the very same narratives that surround their breakup to this day. This is continued in a fun bit of footage, where Paul reads portions of a tabloid piece, recounting the supposed argument that took place the day of George leaving the band.
The awful tension of being locked in each other's arms snapped last night at a TV rehearsal. And Beatles, John, George, Paul and Harold, at very least, a few vicious phrases took place. He, the mystical one who lost so much of the Beatles' magic. Everything in the Beatle garden was rosy. But that was a long time ago.
They went their own private ways, found their own friends, and became less reliant on each other for guidance and comradeship.
The Beatles are constantly aware that the media is watching their every move, reading into every rumor, every minor incident. And for a long time, this was mostly nonsense. But you can start to feel the energy shifting here. Even as the Beatles joke and jest, the words are silly and overdramatic, but more and more, they carry a real weight. Let's just say though, seeing the Beatles in the studio, in their element, is a breath of fresh air. They are still working out the kinks of recording in this manner, without relying on overdubs, as well as working with Glyn Johns, who is quickly getting just the slightest taste of what the Beatles engineers have dealt with for years.
Have we taken any of these that we can hear back, Glynis?
There is a wonderful bit of serendipity, with Billy Preston coming by for a visit at the exact, very specific moment that the Beatles actually need another pair of hands, and in Billy's case, an incredibly talented pair of hands. It was also incredibly unusual for the band. They rarely cared to have any guest musicians. They didn't feel like they needed them. They were the Beatles. Why would they? George bringing in Eric Clapton is an obvious exception, but for the most part, the Beatles never let anyone into their bubble. So you can read clearly the absolute shock and elation on Billy's face on casually being asked to play a Beatles session.
On scene, so if you'd like to do that, you're welcome.
Sure. Beautiful.
Right, and then you'd be on the album.
You're kidding?
And it is on this very same day that Peter Brown walks into the studio to deliver some news.
Oh yeah, it's coming on Friday.
Alan Klein had had his eyes on the Beatles for years. He probably knew more about their business affairs than they themselves did. He kept tabs, looked for chinks in the armor, for an opportunity to lunge forward and strike. His work eventually paid off. His pursuit began all the way back in March of 1964, when he agreed to represent the New York office of RCA Records in a bid to steal the Beatles' recording contract from EMI. He offered Brian Epstein $2 million as a signing fee, plus a 10% royalty, which would have been the most lucrative deal in history. But Brian, in a demonstration of his character, weighed loyalty more than money. In 1966, Klein again approached Brian when he heard that the EMI contract was being renewed, but this time he was refused even a meeting. When Brian died a year later, Klein admitted, "I was driving a bridge out of New York and I heard on the radio that Epstein had died, and I said to myself, I got him." Alan Klein was a villain. There's no amount of retrospect that paints him sympathetically. He was a maneuvering, scummy individual. He was also incredibly driven, a relentless workaholic, and really, genuinely brilliant. Alan Klein had a reputation. There were suspicions about his dealings, his conduct, but he wouldn't have been in this position if he wasn't also very good at his job. His trademark was his ability to squeeze cash out of record companies. He excelled at locating royalty underpayments and other accidental errors. He would pore over company accounts with a relentless, detailed eye. He had a social intelligence, an awareness of the kind of individuals he could target and take advantage of. And with no disrespect, John was the perfect target. He was easily manipulated by a number of individuals in his life, such as Magic Alex. And he had a soft spot for those he considered othered, or crooks, or any such negative connotation, because John himself had been subject to similar labels.
John was more open to things like that. I think he always, his quote about Klein kind of sums it up. Anyone who's been so bad-mouthed can't be that bad. And there was this kind of crazy reverse logic that anyone who was that bad must be good. Right, yeah. And it's very difficult.
But more on that in just 1 second. We're not quite there yet. What happened in India? This is a question I covered extensively in part 4 of the series, where I, in essence, debunked most of the theories and rumors. And here, we see the Beatles discussing their time in India openly.
I don't really know, but it's like we totally sort of put our own personalities under for the sake of it. And you can really see, we're all sort
Who's writing all them songs?
But it is very like that. There's a long shot of you sort of walking with him. And it's just not you, It's just, yeah.
There are lots of little bits to glean from this conversation, but the most crucial piece is the obvious rift in perspective between George and the other Beatles.
Just there's a long shot of you walking. No. Oh, no. No, I just think what we did there, we weren't sort of really very truthful there. You know, it's things like sneaking behind his back and sort of saying it's a bit like school, isn't it? But you can see on the film that it is very like school. I wouldn't mind having 2 months out of every 4 months in a place like that.
Whereas the other three view their time in India as a bizarre phase, a kooky experiment, George still clearly values the experience.
It's that thing, you know, we probably should have sort of...
Been ourselves.
Yeah, a lot more, yeah.
That is the biggest joke, to be yourselves. Because that was the purpose of going there, to try and find who yourself it really is.
Yes, well, we found that, didn't we?
And if you were really yourself, you wouldn't be any of who we are now.
Later in the day, the Beatles once more discuss just exactly what it is they want to do. You can feel the divide here. John is perfectly content to run through the songs, get them down good, and sing it to the camera. George is just happy to be playing every day, really playing, rather than just laying down sporadic overdubs. But Paul still feels frustration. Paul really wants to do something to make this special, but Paul himself has no idea what that is.
But it's just funny to sort of realise that after this is all over, you'll be off in a black bag somewhere.
What you're moaning about is there's no payoff.
I think all I want to do is, like, I probably, you know, having got it together, I probably just want to go and have fun with it, rather than just sort of finish off exactly as we started. And I'd like to sort of do it for the finish. And we just get out in the open, change a scene, or go and do it somewhere else, do it on a live show, do it on a stage. You know, I'd like to light a rocket and really sort of take off for the end of it.
The following bit here is revealing of Paul's perspective at this time. What Paul is expressing here, in a sideways manner, is that once they are done here, John, and the band in general, are going off in their own directions. Paul is afraid that this could be the band's last effort for a long time, if not forever. He wants a climax, a catharsis, because for all he knows, this is their last chance. And out of all of this anxiety arises an idea, in many ways, the perfect idea. It is now January 27th. Today, George walks in quite happy and confidently presents his latest composition, the catchy and bouncy Old Brown Shoe. It's a bright start to what would wind up in retrospect as a very, very dark day. Because John and Yoko had an obligation this evening. They were going to meet the one and only Alan Klein. By the time the meeting was finished, John asked Klein to look after his and Yoko's personal affairs. And just like that, Klein sees complete and utter control over them both.
I heard about him over the years. The first time I heard about him was he said he was one day he'd have the Beatles, you know, about 15, but when Brian was with us, you know. But that's when I first heard about him. But they had this dreadful rumours about him, or, you know, the feeling. But I could never coordinate it with, well, why... The Stones seem to be going on and on with it. I mean, nobody ever said a word, and Mick's not the type to just clam up, you know. So there must be all right. But still, when I heard he wanted to see me, I thought, I got nervous, you know. Because I know when some businessman wants to see me, it's going to be business, and business make me nervous. So, yeah, I don't know, we just sort of decided to meet him. But then we met, and it was very traumatic, you know.
In what way?
Well, because we were both very nervous. He was nervous as shit. And I was nervous as shit. Yoko was nervous as shit. We met at the Dorchester and we went up to his room and that.
You were so...
And we just went in, you know, and he was sitting there all nervous. And we talked to him a few hours and we decided that night he was it. You know.
What made you decide that?
Because he not only knew my work and the lyrics that I'd written, understood them, and from way back. If he knew what I was saying and followed my work, that was pretty damn good for me, because it's hard to see me, John Lennon, in amongst all that. And he talked sense about what had happened, you know. He just said what was going on, you know. And I just knew, you know.
Very intelligent guy.
Well, he's an intelligent guy. He told me what was happening with the Beatles, my relationship with Paul and George and Ringo. He knew every one of them. Oh, he knew every damn thing about us, the same as he knows everything about the Stones. He's a fucking sharp man, you know. I mean, he has the things he doesn't know, but when it comes to that kind of business, he knows, you know. And anybody that knew me that well, without ever having meeting me, had to be a guy that I could let look after. He knew how to handle me, to look after me, you know. let him handle the business. So I wrote to Sir Joe that night. We were so pleased. I said, OK, we'll write to Sir Joe. I said, I don't care what the others say, you can handle me.
Work continues the next day, and Paul, having an appointment at 1:30, takes an early leave.
Is it 1:30? I've got this meeting, so can you do it?
And it is when he does that John first brings up his meeting with Klein.
What did you want to talk about?
Well, just that I saw Klein and that, you know.
Oh, Klein?
Yeah, Klein, Alan Klein.
Oh, I see, yeah.
Yeah, and it's, you know, it's very interesting.
Yeah.
You know, from a lot of angles. And I just think he's fantastic.
Really?
Yeah. You know, he knows everything about everything. Very interesting guy.
Yeah.
I was there till 2 in the morning.
Oh, you went last night?
I went there thinking, well, I've got to see him. I put it off last time. He even knows what we're like, you know. The way he described each one of us, you know, and what we've done and what we're going to do and that. But just like, he knows me as much as you do.
John doesn't have to say all that much, though, because when the session finishes, the Beatles, as a group, all meet with Klein. The meeting was really just a precursor. It is determined that talks not be continued until they all meet alongside John Eastman as well, seeing as the Beatles were now tied to their firm. But Klein had accomplished what he wanted. After hearing that Klein had begun looking into John and Yoko's financial affairs, George and Ringo asked that he do the same for them. They, too, were hooked. There was only one holdout, Paul.
Have you met Alan before?
I met him the other day, you know what I mean? And I met him at the circus. He just sort of said hello.
A strange guy, isn't it?
He's fantastic.
He really is very strange. Very, very clever. But strange, man.
Yeah.
That's what it's about.
We all, we're all hustlers. And the con man who's on our side for a change. All those other con men are on the other side.
He's extraordinary, his capacity. I can't really explain it. I don't know if he speaks to you the same way as he does other people. Perhaps not, because you're who you are, but he'll ask you a question and you're halfway through answering it, and if he doesn't like the answer, or if it's not really what he wanted to hear, he'll change the subject right in the middle of a sentence. That bugs me every time, actually.
The big day finally arrives. The crew meticulously prepares the shoot, but the Beatles are separate from it all, once more debating whether or not they even want to do this. They eventually come to an agreement, and they trudge out onto the roof without hardly an ounce of excitement. It's cold. The equipment is in disarray. Despite themselves, you can tell they are nervous. But then they start playing music. Suddenly, everything has changed. But still, they are a bit tight, a bit unsure. They cut, and then once more launch into Get Back. Crowds begin to gather below. A comic duo of bobbies are called upon, and they reluctantly rap on the door of Apple offices, asking if they could please quiet down. Our doorman, Jimmy, does a brilliant job of deflecting. The officers seem to be in utter disbelief, and despite threatening so, seem in fright of having to arrest anyone. The Beatles, meanwhile, are enjoying themselves more and more. By the way, Peter Jackson's choice to have much of this sequence presented in split screens is directional brilliance. It's a spectacle. Song after song flies by. The crowd has grown to a significant size. The bobbies are frozen in place, and everyone at Apple's doing their best to keep them that way, until Mao is finally instructed to escort the officers to the rooftop. Paul spots the officers and could not be any more thrilled. The Beatles launch into one last performance of Get Back, as Mao painfully begins unplugging the PAs and amps. No arrests are made. The group descends down into the studio room. They listen to the recordings. The energy is electric. Well, except for Yoko. We have a wonderfully sweet moment between Paul, Linda, and Ringo. It is a temporary, fleeting triumph. And in the matter of mere minutes, you can observe the high starting to fade. Reality is creeping back in. The end is near. And it is with this that we will end part 6 of the series. Thank you all so much for watching. If you would like to continue the story, please consider subscribing. I'll be releasing these videos every 2 weeks. I also have a large number of videos recounting the Beatles' history and the making of their albums. If you want to see more. Want to watch part 7 of the series right now? You can do so by joining my Patreon for only $1 a month. It's a wonderful way to support the channel, and I would like to take a moment to personally thank all of my Patreon supporters. With that, thank you so much for watching.